So, a contested topic among fans and current players of Borderlands 4 is the, at times, underwhelming loot you can get when killing bosses. While gun balance is fairly strong, with blues and purples being capable of reasonably beating endgame bosses, and the famous purple knife being insanely good as well, a lot of players have pointed out that even after turning the difficulty up to UVHM5, they fail to get specific drops for insanely long periods of time. Some have even spoken out, saying that UVHM is worse than simply playing, not just without it, but on easy mode, which makes elemental resistances matter less and players take less damage. So you'd automatically assume you get less for it. But I wanted to make my own study on the topic myself, and luckily I already needed to hunt for a fairly rare item, so it wouldn't end up being a complete waste of time. As such, I farmed for the Oscar Mike assault rifle from Gen 1 for 100 runs. Twice. Once with UVHM5 on, and a second time without UVHM and on easy mode. So, here's the statistics. If you don't want the flat graph and answer spoiled to you now, then skip to this time on screen. So, up front, I'll go ahead and provide the answer that, yes, easy mode, from my research, is simply better than UVHM5. The numbers for this research are shown here on screen right now. But if you'd like to hear an explanation on some of these numbers and learn a bit more about this and the process, then go ahead and continue watching. I promise you, it'll be worth it. So as I said in the beginning, I was farming Gen 1 for the Oscar Mike. This thing. I did this via Rava with a Chaosin and an infinite magazine build, as I found this to be the easiest and, frankly, most brain-dead way to not have to pay much attention. And so, as I went, I marked every kill's number of firmware drops, world drop legendaries, 3 to 4 parted guns, which I'll talk more about in a moment, and of course, dedicated drops, which for Gen 1 include both the recursive grenade and, of course, the Oscar Mike. Beyond just that though, I also counted nothing runs, which were marked with a respective X. As such, just let me mark runs fairly quickly. Say I get a firmware rep kit and a recursive grenade, then that run is marked as FR. If I get nothing, X. If I get an Oscar Mike and a firmware, then OF. So on and so forth. So let's start with UVHM5. I'll run you through these attempts in bulks of 10, stopping to talk about any interesting occurrences along the way. If you don't want to watch the attempts and just want to skip to the pure data of them, then skip to the time shown on screen. The core thing to note about our first 10 runs, though, is the lack of things to happen. I only obtained 2 firmware items and a singular gun with 3 parts on it. Even more surprising though, on my second run, I didn't even get a purple. I got whites, greens, and 1 singular blue. The next 10 runs, similarly, wouldn't be very eventful, though I did obtain 5 firmware pieces of gear across these runs. You might be wondering why I'm counting firmware gear in the general sense rather than specific firmware or higher tier gear with firmware. And that's just due to, in my eyes, it not really mattering what gear firmware starts on, as in the end, it'll likely end up swapped onto something else. So a green Deadeye rep kit is the exact same in my eyes as an epic Deadeye shield, both eventually serving the same purpose, so neither really outweigh the other. With that in mind, this also makes the firmware category a pretty easy one to fit into, so one that you'd expect UVHM5 to win if it truly grants better luck on gear, especially in the firmware sense. With that being said, I won't spoil it, and I'll hope you didn't look at the graph as we go on to run 21 through 30, where I get 5 pieces of firmware, and on the 30th run, wrote a love letter to the Chaosin in my notes. It's important to mention I did all of this starting at 2 AM, with this ending at around 5 AM. 31 through 40 performed fairly considerably better though, with 7 pieces of firmware gear, 2 guns with 4 parts, noted down as simply the number 4, and 2 fat recursive grenades. 41 through 50, I obtained another recursive grenade almost immediately, as well as another 7 pieces of firmware gear and another 4-parted gun. 51 through 60 finally hits with something that ends up being the, in my eyes, distincting factor between UVHM and normal/easy modes, with run 52 obtaining a world drop, but not from the boss, and instead a random grunt enemy on the other side of the room. This really surprised me. It actually made me think he dropped it underground for a moment, but remember this, because it becomes important later when talking about easy mode and its world drop rates. 61 through 70, I get another world drop, being a wombo combo, and other than that, mostly just firmware gear afterwards. Remember, this is a hunt for the Oscar Mike. 70 runs in, and we haven't gotten 1. Anyways, 71 through 80, I get a whopping 11 firmware items, a pretty crazy number, But along with that, I also obtain a world drop on run 79. 81 through 90 is almost entirely uneventful though to make up for my lucky streak, other than another world drop, but again, no Oscar mic and 0 firmware or 4-part items. Our final 10 comes up here on UVHM5, and it does have one last fairly interesting shot to give us, with run 91 giving us our second world drop from a grunt enemy. Again, note this for later, as easy mode does seem to calculate world drops differently for unspecified grunt enemies. So that's our first 100 runs through. Sorry if I went through them pretty quickly, I want to get this video out decently fast, and also I figured it'd be boring if I described getting nothing a whopping 64 times. That's a pretty wide margin of over half of the runs done. But with that said, how's it compare to easy mode? With easy mode turned on and my game almost crashing in the process of it, I immediately hop straight back in, with runs 1 through 10 almost immediately proving the contested topic correct. Run 1 was fairly underwhelming with only a singular 3-part gun, but run 2 obtains me a recursive grenade, as well as an Oscar mic, making only the second run in easy mode feature Gen 1 dropping both of its guaranteed drops. That's an absurd occurrence, but don't worry, it gets far, far worse. I also get a world drop plasma coil from the boss, and then 7 firmware items, as well as a pretty neat leech accelerator rep kit. That's not special or like a categoried item, but that's still solid. Runs 11 through 20 are fairly underwhelming though. They still manage to scratch out 6 firmware pieces of gear, and then spiking back up with runs 21 through 30, with 4 pieces of firmware in the first 5 runs, and an Oscar mic, finally, with the laser attachment, and a 5th piece of firmware to boot. Runs 31 through 40 are fairly mediocre, up until 40 itself, which nets me another world drop and 3 pieces of firmware. It's important to note that so far, every world drop on easy mode has been from the boss itself, and not the enemies surrounding it. While on hard mode with UVHM5 on, the world drops split between being from the boss and the enemies around it. 41 through 50 sees me obtaining yet another laser Oscar mic, and then on 51 through 60 obtain another one, with a world drop straight after as well. 61 through 70 is fairly uneventful, other than a very good 3-parted item on run 69, which I used to kill Gen 1 on every single attempt of afterwards. This is why 3 and 4 parted items are included. These are insanely good at times, with some being capable of one-shotting bosses. Purple items, and even some blues, are really worth picking up in this game, as some can do things like this. This run, which is run 70, nets me only another 3-parted item, so continuing on to 71 through 80, we get a couple new firmware items, and another recursive grenade. Then, 81 through 90 comes, which on run 83, features me obtaining a shiny Oscar mic. I guess that's another plus easy mode got, though given it's only cosmetic, I don't really consider it. After that, run 90 is only a whopping 4 firmware items, but another Oscar mic to add to the pile. Then, our last 91 through 100 runs hit, and we obtain an Accelerator and Rage Mini, which, again, isn't any of the categories, but it's pretty solid, as well as our last 4 firmware pieces of gear. So with that, we've talked over our 100 runs in both UVHM5 and our 100 runs in easy mode. So what's the data look like? Well, it looks something like this. This might not look like much, so let me break it down a bit. In hard mode, we obtained a whopping 0 Oscar mics, 3 recursive grenades, 23 firmwares, 6 world drops, and 4 guns with enough parts to get pointed out. This means that out of that, about 64 runs ended in me obtaining nothing, or an X. So UVHM5 grants the player a 64% chance of nothing, and a 23% chance of firmware drops, with a small percent chance of both world drops as well as recursive grenade drops. Though, interestingly, I obtained exactly double the world drops as I did dedicateds. This, in comparison to easy mode stats, is pretty damn bad, in which I got 6 Oscar mics, so 6 more than I got in the other 100 runs. 4 recursive grenades, which is only 1 more than UVHM5, 25 firmware, only 2 more than UVHM5, and all of that at the price of only 5 world drops, which is 1 less than UVHM5. I did, though, obtain 8 numbered guns, so guns with 3 to 4 parts. That is double the amount I obtained in UVHM5. This draws out the obvious conclusion that easy mode has a pretty considerably wider loophole, with me obtaining a lot more Oscar mics and more recursives and high-parted items. Other than the obvious data to draw from this, which is that UVHM5 isn't actually boosting loot at all, it's also worth pointing out that in UVHM5, world drops differed between dropping from the boss and from grunts in its arena, unlike easy mode, which had every single world drop obtained come from the boss itself, and not a single world drop come from a grunt enemy. Also, interestingly, and maybe just coincidentally, every legendary world drop from a grunt enemy turned out to be a non-weapon item, being only grenades, and every world drop from the boss being a gun. This might not have any true impact, and could just be some odd chance I rolled upon via playing, but I thought it was worth noting in case this becomes a consistency for anyone else out there. Thanks for watching. I'd say click on one of these videos, but I don't have any other videos yet, so just go watch LazyData or Killer 6. That's what I did when I was doing all of the 200 runs. Thanks. And check out my Twitch. Maybe.